Let's talk now, though, to Roy Lilley, who's here, of course, because he is a man that knows a thing or two about it. Roy, very good morning to you.
Morning, Mike.
Good to talk to you. I've got a theory, and I'm going to run it past you. The Labour government are telling us that they've cut back on the waiting list, right? But I'm hearing more and more anecdotal information from people who are saying, funnily enough, in the last sort of few months, I've been waiting for 6 months or maybe 9 months for an appointment to get myself sorted. They've given me one, and then literally 3 days later, they've cancelled it. I'm wondering if there's something amiss here and that they're actually taking people off lists because they're offering them appointments and then just cancelling them and then putting them on a sort of a further list, which means they haven't waited more than 18 weeks.
Well, Mike, no, that's not quite right. If the NHS cancels your appointment, what we call in the NHS, the clock doesn't stop. The clock keeps ticking. If a patient stops the clock by saying I can't make the appointment or I don't want the appointment, then the clock stops and then that changes the numbers. So if the NHS does it, it doesn't change the numbers. There's no benefit to them to do it. The benefit to them is to crack people through the system as quickly as possible. The numbers in absolute terms are actually starting to come down. The delays have been really what we laughingly call the winter crisis, which actually started last autumn, and here we are now in the spring. And I was looking at the numbers yesterday. Hospitals are still chock-a-block with people who've got what we might call winter problems, COPD, and there's COVID is still running riot in some places, and no check. So all of those sort of winter things are still bunging up the hospitals, because the difficulty is they impact frail elderly people mainly. And you can't send them home unless you can send them home safely. That means social care, and we know the problems with social care.
Well, that's the thing, isn't it? There's still that problem still hasn't been solved. So as long as those people are still holding the space in the beds, the bed blockers, if you like, it's not a very good word, but it's a word. Nothing's really changed. I'm just slightly suspicious of a government that suddenly says, we are making progress where nobody else did. And I like to look into these things, and all I know is an awful lot of people are telling me that they're given appointments and then they're getting them cancelled.
Yeah, look, it's a good question to ask, and whatever is happening to waiting lists at the moment, it's got nothing to do with this government. I mean, it takes a long time to turn the NHS around. The old story of if you want to turn a fuel tanker into Southampton docks, you've got to turn right at Bilbao. It's a bit like that. Everything takes a long time. So what is happening at the NHS now, it's got nothing to do with anything that Wes Streeting has done. This is just the natural progression. The numbers blocking up the NHS will come down, the throughput will improve, and the throughput actually can be quite quick, because about 60% of people on NHS waiting lists are waiting for a diagnostic, and of the 60%, only 20% will need a period of inpatient care. I mean, the others might need outpatient care or day case or what have you, but that solid lump comes down quite quickly if the NHS gets a free run at it. And because it's not had it, it's had the strikes. We've all forgotten the chaos they caused.
I haven't forgotten.
Yeah, well then, I'm not standing on freezing picket lines interviewing doctors is not my favourite occupation. But
well, don't worry, you won't find any doctors on the picket lines. The picket lines are always full of people who are not doctors picketing on their behalf, because the doctors are all busy working in the private sector. But how about this, right? This is from Steve. Mike, I've been on an NHS waiting list to see a cardiologist in June of last year. Every 3 months I get an important email from the NHS with a link to a survey I have to complete in order to stay on that waiting list. The survey has only one question: do I still require my appointment? By not responding or replying no, the waiting list gets shorter. How many others who don't even see this email are wrongly removed from the queue in the name of bringing down waiting lists? That's a possibility as well, isn't it?
Yeah, that does happen. That's called validating waiting lists. The NHS has to validate waiting lists. Yeah. That's a requirement of the Department of Health. Yeah. And so, validation...
Because there will be no doubt people who have died waiting for an NHS appointment, and you might as well knock them off the list. But, the other one that I wanted to ask you about, Roy, was this is another thing that came across my desk a couple of weeks ago, is there was a doctor who was speaking on social media. He gave an interview to somebody, I can't remember who, talking about how, he can't get a job in Britain. He's a qualified NHS doctor. He's gone through all the training, but there are no vacancies. And that seems to me to be a bizarre kind of twist in the tale, where we keep saying we haven't got enough doctors, we haven't got enough nurses, but apparently there are no vacancies.
Yeah, that issue is predominantly in primary care, where the GPs were given a bundle of money to improve their performance by recruiting allied health professionals. So that's like physiotherapists and pharmacists and people like that. They couldn't use the money to employ doctors. That rule has now recently been changed, and so the situation will improve. But it is true, we've got a supply of doctors that we can't find placements for. It's particularly true of younger doctors coming out of training as well. It's I mean, it seems bonkers to me that we've got huge waiting lists and all the rest of it, and we've got doctors that I've heard a story the other day of a doctor who was an Uber driver, driving a cab in London.
Yeah, it's insane, isn't it?
Yes, it is. I mean, there's a lot of complexities in how the allocations model is about the funding. And of course, the other issue is when doctors come out of their primary training and then they need to go to a hospital for training. Yes. That's where the real bottleneck occurs, because that's where the funding is limited by the government. So people go through university, the part of their training. When they get to do the practical training in hospitals, the number of placements is decided by government and not the NHS, and that's where they keep their handle on the tap.
Yeah, interesting, because I mean, Wes Streeting is basically saying that we need more doctors. We need to stop plundering doctors from other countries. You need to train more. But if he wants to train more doctors, surely he's going to have to make it possible for them to have jobs at the end of it.
Yes, by changing the placements. I mean, and you're right. I mean, there's a thing called the Red List, which is published by the World Health Organization, a whole list of countries that you're not supposed to recruit from. But we've been getting around it. There's two ways to get around it. One, if the individual in the Red List country wants to come and work here, we can't say no if they're suitably qualified. So, there are people who are encouraged to apply of their own volition and not through a formal channel. And the other thing is, well, what a lot of hospitals are doing, and they did it in Nepal, where a lot of nurses were recruited, and they haven't got the nurses themselves. There was a big row in Nepal about it, but they were saying, well, come to the NHS and we will give you enhanced training. So if they come over for training, then they're not recruited in the normal way, and you can get around the Red List. So, but they've been doing it because they've been so desperate for nurses. And I just read this morning in the good old British Journal of Nursing, which is
God bless you.
my regular reading, and there's an article in there that's talking about how the number of people applying to become nurses has dropped off alarmingly. And I've been around the NHS for a long time, not quite since when Florence Nightingale was a nurse, but very nearly. And the first time I've seen the number of applications to become a nurse dropping off, and that's really quite worrying.
Yeah, absolutely right. Roy, great to speak to you. Thanks very much indeed. Roy Lilley, former NHS Trust chairman, giving us a view there from the NHS from the inside. And he says if you are cancelled by the NHS appointment system, you stay on the appointments list. Well, that may well be. But do you get moved to another list is the point? Do you get then required and then sort of calibrated, if you like, so that you haven't waited 18 weeks anymore, you've only waited 1 week? I don't know. It's just a question. I want more of your stories.